Okay, back with more of our new Wayside School Beneath the Cloud of Doom. Chapter 7, The Closet That Wasn't There. Mac was a curious kid. When Miss Mush served chicken fingers, he asked her how many fingers a chicken had on each hand. After lunch, he played basketball. Besides playing, he was also the self-appointed announcer, describing every shot, every pass, and every dribble. Jenny finally told him to put a sock in it. Only then, when he stopped talking, did Mac remember that he'd left his catcher's mask in the cafeteria. Mac liked to wear his catcher's mask for all sports, including basketball. He was a curious kid. The cafeteria was on the 15th floor. Mac found his mask right where he'd left it, but by then, it hardly seemed worth it to go all the way back down to the playground, so he continued up to the 30th story. And there, just outside his classroom door, was the most curious thing that Mac had ever seen. Next to the wall was some sort of giant closet. It hadn't been there before lunch. But that wasn't what made it curious. The closet was wrapped up in heavy chains and locked with a giant padlock. Mac moved closer. Behind the chains, he could see double doors with a steel bar clamped across them. Several signs were taped to the doors. "Keep back." There's the closet. "Do not open doors. Danger. Call the fire department if you smell something unusual." Mac sniffed, but all he could smell were chicken fingers. Behind the chains in the steel bar, each door had its own lock. He could see two keyholes, one red and the other green. He put on his catcher's mask just to be safe and tried to open one door, then the other. They wouldn't budge. He tried to peer through the keyholes, but they were tiny too. He knocked on one of the doors. It seemed to be made of thick wood. "Anyone in there?" he called. There was no answer. He knocked again and then pressed his ear against the side of the closet. Still nothing. "What's that?" asked Dee Dee, coming up the stairs. Mac shrugged. Dee Dee read the signs aloud. "Keep back. Do not open doors. Danger." She tried one of the doors. "I think it's locked," said Mac. More kids made it up the stairs. Each one stopped at the closet, read the signs, and then tried to open the doors. Terrence kicked the doors. Jason rattled the chains. "Look, it's one long chain," he determined, "wrapped around 4 times. "What do you think's inside?" asked Leslie. "Snakes," said Paul. He was afraid of snakes. "Spiders," said Rondi. She was afraid of spiders. "Monsters," said Allison. She loved monsters. "What if it's Mrs. Gorf?" guessed Kelvin. Everyone shuddered. Mrs. Gorf was the worst teacher they've ever had. "Give me a boost," said Mac. Jenny cupped her hands, and Mac stepped up first onto Jenny's hands, then onto the steel bar. He gripped the top edge of the closet and tried to shimmy up. "Get away from there!" shouted Mrs. Jules. "All of you!" She had returned from the teacher's lounge only to see the children hanging all over the closet like monkeys. "Mac, get down now!" Mac tried to hop down, but his foot got tangled in the chains and he fell onto his back. "Oh, I think I broke my tailbone," he complained. "You're lucky that's all you broke," said Mrs. Jules. "What's inside?" asked Terrence. "Never you mind," said Mrs. Jules. "Don't you children know the meaning of danger? You're not to go anywhere near my closet. Don't look at it. Don't even think about it. It's not there." "But I can see it," said Mac, still lying on the floor. "But I can see it," Mac said, still lying on the floor. "It's not there," Mrs. Jules insisted. "But—" "No ifs, ands, or buts," said Mrs. Jules. Everyone shuffled inside the classroom. Mac was still on the floor. He stood up and adjusted his catcher's mask, which had become cockeyed when he fell. He took one last look at that closet that wasn't there, then walked into the classroom more curious than ever. I wonder what's in it. Code word, closet. Closet. Tell me closet, and I'll give you an extra credit point on science. I'm going to write it down so I don't forget. Chapter 8. Science. That's so funny. What a coincidence. Okay. Science. 29 hands were raised. There were only 28 kids in Mrs. Jules' class, but Joyce stretched both her arms high in the air. She figured it doubled her chance of being chosen. She waved them back and forth and around in circles. Pick me, begged Phoebe. "Pick me," Mrs. Jules urged Calvin, sitting next to Phoebe. "Sorry, Calvin, you're too heavy," Mrs. Jules told him, "and your toes are too tiny, Phoebe." Todd sat behind Joy, but Mrs. Jules couldn't see him behind Joy's helicopter arms. "Okay, Joy," said Mrs. Jules. Everyone else groaned. Joy was all smiles. "You lose, losers," she said as she headed toward the door. This week for science, they would be studying clouds. Luckily, Mrs. Jewell's class was on the 30th floor. It was the classroom closest to the sky. Last week, they studied dirt. That wasn't so lucky. By the time they made it down to the ground, science was over, and they had to turn around and trudge back up. Everyone brought their science notebooks and gathered just outside the door by the closet that wasn't there. Mrs. Jewell put her hands around Joy's waist. "Alley-oopsie," she called out and lifted Joy straight up. Joy giggled. This was why Mrs. Jewell hadn't chosen Kelvin. He was too heavy for her to lift. Mrs. Jewell set Joy on top of the closet. Just above her, a trap door led to the roof. Joy stood on her tiptoes and pushed it open. This was why Mrs. Jewell hadn't chosen Bibi. Her toes weren't long enough. A rope ladder tumbled down. One by one, the children climbed the rope ladder to the roof. "Be sure to stay away from the edge," Mrs. Jewell called up to them. There was a safety railing around the edge, but it was for taller people. Mrs. Jewell was afraid her students could slip right under it. She was the last one up through the trap door. When she reached the roof, she saw everyone standing at the edge. "What did I just say?" she demanded. Everyone stared blankly at her. "Alley-oopsie," asked Damien. "Well, at least somebody was paying attention," said Mrs. Jewell. She told everyone to take 2 steps back and to sit on their bottoms. "But then we'll be farther away from the clouds," Matt complained. "Sometimes safety is more important," said Mrs. Jewell. She pointed out the clouds to her class. "That one there is a cumulus cloud." Some of the students wrote it down in their notebooks. Bibi drew a picture of a sleeping giant. The cumulus cloud was his pillow. "And that's a cirrus cloud over there," said Mrs. Jewell. Bibi drew a picture of flying angels. Hundreds of white feathers had fallen from their wings and had swirled into a cloud. Bibi could draw really fast. "What kind of cloud is that one?" Mrs. Jewell asked Benjamin. He was pointing at a dull, dark cloud way off in the distance. Mrs. Jewell gasped. If Bibi were to draw it, her picture would look exactly like the inside of a vacuum cleaner bag while the vacuum was still on. But Bibi had never seen the inside of a vacuum cleaner bag while the vacuum was still on, so she couldn't draw it. "Everyone back to the classroom," Mrs. Jewell shouted. "Double quick!" The children scrambled to the trap door. "Hurry!" ordered Mrs. Jewell. Some fell right through, others got rope burns. Mrs. Jewell didn't worry about little things like that. She was the last one through the hatch. Sitting atop the closet that wasn't there, she tossed the ladder back on the roof and locked the trap door. She climbed down, stepping onto the chains and steel bar. The children were waiting quietly inside the classroom, hands folded on their desks. Mrs. Jewell walked to the side of the room and looked out the window. Either the cloud was moving closer or it was getting bigger, or both. "What kind of cloud is it?" Mrs. Jewell asked Leslie. There are times when adults hide the truth from children so as not to worry them, but Mrs. Jewell was a teacher, and this was science. "Take a good look, boys and girls," she said, pointing out the window. Then with a slight tremble in her voice, she said, "That is a cloud of doom." The room darkened.